And let me get going. Oops. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Today's Let's Talk is about building meaningful connections later in life, whatever later in life means to you, with Lakshmi Rangajaran. And whether you're watching this in the live Zoom audience or you're watching this via live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Meta, we want you engaging in the conversation. So please, if something is said that really resonates with you, let us know. If you have quote and advice to share, let us know in the comment or chat. I know I read them, and I know a lot of our folks in our community read them. So, once again, this is a conversation, right? It's not a boring presentation. We want you engaged. Your voice matters. So once again, let us know in the chat or the comment. For those who are new to Community of Seven, our micro learnings and our Let's Talks are really there to help you elevate your mindset and skill set by bringing in leading authors, podcast hosts, coaches, executives, founders, and subject matter experts. And for those who are in the live Zoom audience, if you feel comfortable, I know some of us have bad hair days, but I know for me, as a speaker, it's so helpful to see your beautiful faces and your expressions. So if you can, turn on your video because we want you in the conversation as well. For those watching on live stream via YouTube or Meta or for Zoom, we want you interacting. So we always do a quick little quiz beforehand. So for those who are in the live Zoom audience, top right-hand side, if you can put this into gallery mode, so we should kind of see each other in this little group. And I'm going to ask a series of questions. If the answer is yes, you're going to raise both hands like this. If the answer is no, you just leave your hands down. For those who are watching via live stream, in the chat or comments, wherever you're dialing in from, you can write yes or no, okay? So yes, both hands, no, just hands down. First question, do you find it harder to make new friends now compared to when you were younger? Okay, next question. Have you ever felt awkward or unsure about how to start a new friendship as an adult? I was just talking to Lakshmi about this, and it feels like dating. Like friendships as an adult just is so awkward. Next question. Do you feel like your social circle has shrunk over the past 5 to 10 years? Have you ever wanted to reach out to someone but hesitated because you weren't sure if they'd be interested in connecting? Do you feel like your friendships today are as deep and fulfilling as you'd like them to be? Have you ever avoided a social event because you didn't want to deal with small talk or new people? Totally me. I can see all the introverts raising their hands for that. Do you think making friends as an adult should be easier than it actually is? Last question. Would you be open to trying new ways to meet people, even if it feels uncomfortable at first? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for everyone. Those in the Zoom audience, you can just put it on speaker mode so you just see me. I think I'm going to experiment with something. If I have 5-10 minutes at the end, for those who are in the live Zoom audience, I want to do breakout groups so that you can kind of connect with each other. I'm going to have you have questions for you guys to prompt. If you guys have time, if we don't run over, I know you guys have tons of questions you might have for Lakshmi, but I might stay a little bit after if anyone wants to kind of just connect with people. And I promise you it'll be fun. And I'm just going to have some questions to kind of to ask. And that'll be at the end. So please stay. And I know the introverts want to leave as soon as we do that. But I tell you, it will be fun. So as we talked, the focus of today's microlearning is on building meaningful connections later in life. And here's the thing. Making friends, I'm 50. I turned 50 last year. And making friends as a Gen Xer is freaking awkward. I mean, let's be real. We grew up without social media. We called people on landlines. Most of us were latchkey kids. And our idea of making plans involved hoping someone would show up at the mall at the right time. So fast forward a few decades, and suddenly we're in our 40s and our 50s, trying to figure out how to build meaningful connections again, but without the built-in social structure we used to have in our younger years. So for many of us, our friendships were naturally shaped by work, school, or the chaos of raising kids. But now, some of us are empty nesters. Others never had kids, and many have left traditional workplaces, become solopreneurs, or they find themselves surrounded by younger colleagues. I think I see some nodding heads on that one that don't quite relate. So you throw in a mixture of divorce, career shifts, relocations, and a general wariness of small talk, and suddenly making new friends feels like an overwhelming and honestly kind of awkward task. So we're wired differently than millennials and Gen Z. We're less likely to slide into someone's DMs to start a conversation. And we don't have the same comfort level with the constant digital interactions that, younger kids might have, right? Many of us also grew up with the belief that friendships was something that just happened and not something that you had to actually actively work at. So how do we change that? How do we rethink what friendship looks like in midlife? And most importantly, how do we move past the awkwardness to create meaningful connections? So that's exactly what we're going to dive into today with Lakshmi. She's an expert on modern relationships, connections, and dating later in life. Before I introduce her, though, I'm going to do a quick quiz in the chat or comment, whether you're on live stream or the live Zoom audience. Answer this in the comment or the chat, but don't press send till I tell you. Just answer it in the comments. First question. How many friends do you actively communicate with over Zoom, phone, or text? So how many friends do you actively communicate with over Zoom, phone, or text in a month? So those are unique friends. So if you talk to one person 10 times, that still counts as one, okay? If you talk to two friends, but 100 times, that's still two, if that makes sense. So type in the answer in the chat, and I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, press send. 15, 3, 5, 6, 2, Bridget 1. Well, you just have a whole bunch of new friends today. 7. Oh my God, TR 20? How do you have the time? That is so awesome. Okay, so next question. How many of these friends do you meet in real life in a month? In real life, where you see them. Okay, send. 3, 2, 5, 4, 1, 10, 6. Okay, 1 if I'm lucky, right? My husband always jokes around and says that I would, if I wasn't married and didn't have a child, I would probably be a monk. So I totally get all of that. So let me bring out Lakshmi. Let me add the spotlight. Super. So I'm so excited to have Lakshmi here on this call today. She has had a front row seat to how relationship building has changed over the past several decades. She was a professional bartender for over 4 different decades. She has watched the shift in how we interact in the service industry. She began designing and experimenting with singles events formats in 2010 to look at how environments could affect the way people interact and learn about each other. Her role led to a role at Match.com, where she worked for almost 4 years. I know I was on that years ago before marriage. As a dating culture researcher, she has deeply studied the trends and patterns in how we make decisions about our romantic partners, and her work in dating was easily translated to work relationships as she launched the workplace connection practice at WeWork in 2018. She currently creates and hosts the Later Dater Today podcast. If you haven't subscribed, go right now and subscribe to the Later Dater Today podcast. It is hilarious. It is insightful. You will cry, you will laugh, all the good feels. She guides single folks between the ages of 45 to 59. I squarely probably Gen X, right? To reimagine connection and relationships. She speaks to professionals and alumni groups whose memberships are often traversing the topic of dating later in life. And she coaches highly successful and motivated midlife folks who don't know how to date, but often think they do. So I know she's a dating expert, but today we're also going to be talking about friendships, right? So some of you might not be looking for relationships, but I actually just went on a friend date last week from like, I just met this wonderful woman named Mary, and we had befriended each other in CrossFit, and she invited me to this book club. And it was so awesome, but it was kind of like that awkward, like, do you want to go to this event with me? And I said yes, and I'm so happy I did. So this was kind of the spark. Since I knew that Lakshmi was doing this call, I've been kind of really pushing the boundaries of my comfort zone. So drum roll, Lakshmi, welcome.
Oh, hi, Lam.
So excited to have you here. So tell me, how did you get so interested in dating culture of all things?
I know, good question, right? So I was working at an ad agency in like 2009, and online dating was already a thing, but it was like just becoming a lot more common. And I kind of started just noticing the changes in people and the changes in how people were meeting and how they were making decisions and the snap judgments. And then especially like when Tinder came out and all the dating apps came out, like I was just like, wow, this is going to change everything. And no one's really talking about it. Like everyone's just only talking about the upside. Like, oh my God, now I can just pick up my phone and I can meet all these people and it's going to be so fun. And I just didn't feel like anyone was really discussing how is this going to change culture? How is this going to change like the fabric of relationships? And so I just got super interested in it from the beginning. And wanted to see, not only what was changing, but what did we want to hold on to? What did we want to slow down? And so I've just always been fascinated with how people make their romantic decisions.
I mean, so let's kind of connect it because this conversation is, we're going to talk about relationships as well, because some people might be looking, but how does your work in dating connect to relationships more broadly, including just making friendships as we get older?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a very, very direct correlation. And that's why, like, I often say to people, if you want to understand relationship culture, look at dating culture, because whatever is happening in dating is going to be happening more broadly in all relationships. And it's a very, very like one-to-one map. Dating is always just a couple of years ahead. The biggest thing is that the thing about modern dating and like all modern relationships is it's really about those first couple of interactions, right? Those first kind of 1 to 5 interactions really set the stage for whether this person is going to be close to you, whether they're going to be an acquaintance, whether they're just going to be someone that you kind of keep in the background or someone that you really don't want to engage with at all. So kind of navigating those early interactions to me is actually what dating is. I always say it's kind of like the first 1 to 5. And again, why this connects to relationships is today, those first interactions may not even be in person, right? They might be on text. They could be on screen. They could be on Zoom. And so there's a lot of different places where we're having our first interactions. And that is why understanding what happened in dating actually translates a lot to what's happening in relationships more broadly.
And okay, sorry, let me find myself, try multitasking again. I think I find it really fascinating that you mentioned that you started to see the divide with kind of like digital, mobile, online becoming more prevalent, right? And I'm thinking during COVID, I've always been an introvert, but I've always been an introvert that was in publicly client-facing roles. So I had to kind of mask it and be more social.
Yeah.
But during COVID, being able to work from home and going online Oh my God. Like most people like were devastated. I was so excited to not have to leave the house. And so all my friendships just became virtual.
Yeah.
And so now that we're kind of out of COVID, like, and really doing meeting in real life, it's been a struggle for me to actually want to go to a networking event or go to a party. It's like having to actually get outside, and it's a different type of connection than virtual. It's almost like it's easier for me to be in this forum than it is for me to stand at a party, have awkward conversations. And I don't know if that was just the change of COVID or whatnot. Like, how do you kind of transition? Like, have you seen that COVID kind of impacted how people make friends or date, you know, post COVID?
Yeah, I mean, COVID impacted everything, like as you said, right? So I think what it did is it changed everyone's portfolio of interactions, right? So you might have had like an 80% IRL portfolio before and then like 20% online. And then all of a sudden it flipped, right? And so what you're seeing now is actually even some of the most extroverted people, their in-person muscles kind of atrophied, and
Yeah.
they're finding that they're going to dinner and struggling a little bit, or they're going out and they're like, wait, but I'm an extrovert. What happened to me? And what
Yeah.
happened is just that you recalibrated and you got stronger in other areas, or your energy was being taken up by other forms. Like a lot of people have talked about not just Zoom, but how important Slack is, or texting, or voice notes. And so I think what I see happening with people dating and more broadly in work relationships is everyone's trying to figure out, okay, where does my personality really come out? Where do I want to have more like transactional conversations? Where do I want to be funny? Where do I really want to build emotional connection with someone? And like I mean, you were talking about like small talk at a party, but for other people, as you can imagine, that is what they miss the most. They don't
Yeah.
want to have a serious discussion. They want to meet new people. They want to have those just sort of like early get to know you conversations, and they find that very energizing. And so what I'm noticing is everyone thought, oh, these are the ways I like to connect and communicate. And now everyone is reevaluating and reassessing and being like, actually, I do like Zoom for this.
Yeah.
Or actually, I like text for this. Or I feel really close when my best friend sends me a voice note.
Mm.
Or like for me, my best friend, she calls me after she's dropped her kids off at daycare. And that's just our time. And she's kind of doing stuff in the background. And I know that, but that has become our very good time. And it took us a while to figure that out. So what
Yeah.
I would say to everybody is it's not that something is working or not working. It's that you are recalibrating, because now you have multiple platforms, and some of the ones that used to work for you are not working now. And some of the ones that you thought, oh God, I'm never going to send a voice note, are incredibly meaningful to you now.
You know, it's funny because I'm ashamed to say this, but I can't remember the last time I called someone, like just out of the blue. Like I will have to text and confirm or like do a calendar note. Like the thought of
Yeah.
just calling someone just seems like you're just opening their house door, or right? And I
Right.
have friends who will just call me out of the blue and I love it.
Right.
And so
Exactly.
they do it for
Exactly.
me, but the thought of me doing it, I'm just like, it's almost like I go into Sharon's house and just like, hey, you know what I mean? But it's almost like that level of like I don't know where it happened because it wasn't like that before. But
Right.
I
Exactly.
have not called anyone probably for the past year, unless it was like my husband. Like he's the only person I probably call out of the blue. Um, so
That's a really good point. And your speaker a couple weeks ago, Joanne, mentioned this too. Like you have some sort of internal narrative around it, right? That
yeah,
calling someone is an intrusion. And for somebody else, they're like, oh my God, this is so nice because it's unplanned. And
yeah,
it's
I
a
love it. I love it.
surprise,
But then when
right?
I think about calling someone, I'm like, oh, let me text them first and schedule it. You
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
You know, another thing that has helped me a lot as an introvert, I've noticed that all of my friends, and so my husband, my daughter, all are extreme extroverts. And I don't think I would have community friends if it weren't for them. Because literally my husband will meet someone and say, oh, you should talk to my wife. And I've like, you know, I don't know if I would make those bonds in our community if it wasn't for them, like my daughter Morgan doing play dates. Like I've become friends with a lot of the parents that she plays with, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've talked about this as well. Most of my friends, because I'm not proactive, because I'm just so comfortable in my own bubble. All my good friends are extroverts because they're the ones that will pick up the phone and say, Lan, let's go out, let's do this, let's meet up, where that's
Yes.
not necessarily programmed in my head, right? Like
Yes.
it's interesting to kind of see this as we get older, but also if you have introversion, if you're an ambivert, if you're an extrovert. But let's go back to kind of our original conversation. Why do you think that making new friendships and connections become harder for people between the age of 45 and 59, which is kind of like the sweet spot, I think, of our audience. We might have some people that are younger, maybe some people that are older, but I think a lot of my audience are Gen X, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I would even, maybe poke at, is it harder or is it different?
Mhm.
Right. Because I think even when we say, oh, it gets so much harder to make friends as we get older, I mean, we kind of make that come true. Right. In the same way that people are like, oh, it's, dating is so much harder when you get older. There are some things that are harder. And then there's actually some things that I'm sure you've found that can be easier. Like Gen Xers, because they remember the world before cell phones and before computers, they have a lot of muscle memory. They have a lot of muscle memory of talking to new people and maybe being in an environment where they don't necessarily have a conversation. So there's so many benefits and pluses to being like a little bit later in life as you get to, as you're building relationships. So I would really encourage people to not think that it is necessarily harder. I think it's different. And I think people should do what you're doing, which you just exhibited when you were talking. You're sort of like listening to your internal dialogue and be like, actually, I do like my extroverted friends to pull me out. Actually, I don't mind when someone calls me, but I seem to have trouble calling someone out of the blue. So I think the first thing is paying attention to that. What are you saying about getting a text out of the blue? What are you making it mean if you have a long text conversation? And I would really, really pay attention to the places where you're actually enjoying modern communication and maybe the places where you're not enjoying it so much. But to answer your question more directly, like why does it get harder? I think it gets harder because we have to understand that there are just a lot of different places now for our personalities and relationships to develop. And I think one tendency of Gen Xers, and this is where I think like you are correct, and it happens a lot in dating too, is I think that sometimes we think that seeing someone in person is the most valuable form of interaction, and we devalue the other ones. And I see this so much in dating. You have to value them all pretty equally because you're going to have to do all of them. You're going to have to be as much yourself and as fun and connective on text as you are when you finally meet up in a bar or a restaurant to meet in person. And that's where I think there is a little bit, I think Gen Xers can get so hung up on, if we're not meeting in person, it's not real. It doesn't matter as much. And I think meeting up in person, as you're older, you might be more busy. You're dealing with schedules. So when you value in-person interaction, but that's the hardest thing to get sometimes. You're kind of setting yourself up for that's when it gets hard, and that's when it's a hard situation.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Lakshmi, because I mean, this was like 15, 20 years ago before I met my husband, but I did online dating. I was on Match.com. So I don't know if you were there when I was like dating, but I would have these amazing conversations over phone with people because this is pre-Zoom. And then you'd meet with them in person and they were duds. It was like, it was just like no energy. It was just like, and it's
or vice versa.
Yes.
The conversation is a dud, and then you meet in person and it's so easy, right? It can go both ways.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you kind of have to work both muscles in a lot of ways, especially in
Very
this
well put.
kind of day and age, right? before my next question to you, I'm gonna just read some of the comments because we have some really great feedback
Great.
from people in the chats. Bridget says, my most important friendships go back to my childhood. Me too. I think a lot of us could probably say that too. I actually, during COVID, I got to reconnect with a lot of my friends from high school, and that was really amazing. Bridget goes on to say, I'm glad I am Gen X, no technological interference. We talk one-on-one and spent a lot of time together. TR, the same with me, 80s babies, 90s kids spent a lot of time with the family, less on video games, engaged in reading, studying nature, art, and spirituality. So I'm seeing a lot of these Gen Xers. Also a 70s extrovert, but this is really useful stuff. I hope I can help my kids. I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, that's probably another conversation for another day, but I really worry about like this new generation because everything is online. I mean, let's kind of just talk about that. We're in this age where sometimes everything can be virtual on Zoom, all this other stuff, and that might be your comfort zone, right? I'm seeing this a lot with kids these days,
Yeah.
but also some folks who might be like our age, right? How do you get past that, the virtual divide, and then get more comfortable, doing like meeting in real life? Like, is there a practice? Like, what are the things that you can do? Because I know for me, it took some practice because during COVID, everything went virtual. And then when I had to start doing in real life, it was a little bit awkward. Like, what are your thoughts? I mean, I know you don't have all the answers, but what from your experience kind of seeing this, like what are things that we can do if we're moving from virtual to in real life?
Yeah, I think one thing that you can do is start sort of a conversation or a line of thought. If you're doing that in text, or let's say you're doing that in email or whatever, and if you notice a point where you're like, this is actually better discussed in person, say that.
Mhm.
Right? There are certain topics, like I think if you're talking about something sort of like that's kind of emotional, or maybe has an element of debate, like kind of say, oh my God, we should talk about this in person. Like this topic deserves to be discussed in person. And what
Mhm.
you're doing there is you're acknowledging the constraints of the space that you're in. Right. So like texting is really good for like exchanging information. It's not always the best for having a nuanced, multifaceted conversation. So when you do that, not only are you acknowledging this space is probably good for this, and when we meet in person, that would be good for that, is that you're sort of setting up that conversation for when you actually do meet. So like when we were texting about the pros and cons of friendship, modern friendship. Like, let's talk about that now. The other thing is, and I think you talked about, the extroverts in your life. This is where I actually tell extroverts, like, this actually might be a little bit easier for you. And right now is a time for you to lead, because it's not that introverts don't want to connect, but they go about it a little bit differently. They might be a little bit, they might be paying attention to their surroundings more and kind of, assessing that. So I think this is a moment, actually, if you are much more comfortable with spontaneous conversation in person, that you do actually take a leadership role and kind of help the other person and just sort of be aware of the dynamic. But in general, I think when you are meeting in person, I think sometimes there's a tendency to rush. Like, okay, we're together, so we have to make the most of this time. We have to make it purposeful and intentional and all of these words that we throw out there. And I think part of what you can do in person is just relax a little bit and give the conversation time to naturally unfold. I think sometimes people come in with these agendas, like we have to have a deep conversation. This has to be worth my time. And I think we forget that sometimes it's okay to sit with another person and let a conversation naturally take shape.
I love that. That's such a great point. I like, like kind of going back to that whole extrovert introvert. Like I love my introverted friends, but because we are both introverts, we never see each other. It's like,
Yeah.
because we're so comfortable being alone. And so like just that kind of shift of having, or even being an introvert, but just saying, okay, I know my friend is not going to necessarily call me. Maybe I have to kind of step up. So it's not just the extroverts.
No, that's a really, really good thing. And I think especially with I'm somewhere in between and I've been more introverted at different points in my life. My best friend is an introvert. And so we have very explicit discussions, especially when she became a parent. And she said to me very bluntly, and not bluntly, but just in a very honest way, like, I don't pick up the phone. I will always answer the phone when you call, but I just don't have that reflex. So
Yeah.
like whenever something happens to me, like I get good news or, I see a cute sweater at the store, I want to call her. I want to tell her.
Yeah.
And she always picks up. But
Yeah.
she does not have that same instinct. And
Yeah.
it doesn't mean she doesn't love me. It just means that she's not wired that way. And
Also,
so sometimes we have a very honest conversation about like how we communicate
yeah.
and how we want to be in each other's lives because it's not as easy anymore. So what were you saying, Lan?
I love that. And also sometimes when you're in different stages of your life, because
Yeah.
I have a lot of my friends who were single, you know what I mean? Or they chose purposely not to get married and have kids because they are enjoying life and traveling. And it's like, I've lost, for a while, I would lose touch with them because we had such different lives where my life is very boring. I work, I am like an Uber chauffeur to my daughter, right? I'm not traveling the world. And so sometimes that commonality starts because we're in different life stages or we've chosen different things. Like a lot of the people when I was in the music industry, I've lost touch with because we're in different life kind of spans. But it's important to still reach out to those people. A, B, also not expecting other people to be like us. Because I think if your friend were to be, or if you were to expect your friend to be a caller, to do all this other stuff, and that's just not how she's hardwired, and you take offense to it,
Right. Exactly.
that friendship is not going to last. And so I have
Exactly.
so many friends where I will not see them for like a year or two, but then when I see them, it's like, we're just shooting the shit. It's like no time has passed, right? Or I have friends, Sharon, who's on the call right now. I've known for like 15 years now. It's been a long, no, maybe
Yeah.
10 years, something long. But like, when I see her, I get so excited, but we don't necessarily talk all the time because she's out in Atlanta. I'm out in New York. But when I see her, I get so excited, especially when it's in person, right? So it's part of it is just being able to, you know, understand how you operate, but also letting your friends know. Because I think that's kind of important too, that you're on their
Yes.
mind, but you might not operate like them. You might not be social or whatnot. So,
Exactly. And sorry, you brought
no,
up a
no,
real
go on. No,
that
no, go on.
actually comes up in dating a lot. I think there's this idea that, people who make the same life choices, like they want to date people that pick the same life choices. And that's not necessarily true, right? So some people who have kids, they might float away, and other people don't. They actually come in closer.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you just don't know which way it's going to go. So like the corollary to dating is a lot of people are like, oh, well, if I am married and had kids and I will only date people that were married and had kids. And that doesn't necessarily work. That's not necessarily true. Like a lot of people pick different like life lanes and they actually intersect beautifully later in life. Right. But
yeah.
there's an assumption that you want to become closer to the people that made the same choices as you. And I have found that to be categorically false.
No, I know I live vicariously through my single friends.
Yeah, no,
Because they're
definitely.
having a blast.
Yeah, I mean, we're all doing different things, and it's not necessarily a point of connection to have made the same choices. And I think that's an easy mistake to make.
I love that. So, what inspired you to start the Later Dater Today podcast, and what have you learned just from this experience?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked because I love talking about the Later Dater today. I think I had studied so many different dimensions of dating. I had studied, app dating. I had studied like niche dating, like, certain subcultures. I'd studied singles events and I had really studied how environment impacts the way that people meet. Um, And I had dabbled a little bit in, midlife dating, but I decided a couple of years ago that I was just going to go full force. I was going to study nothing else because I felt like it was really overlooked. Because if you look at a lot of the dating guidance that kind of dominates, it's really written for the 20 or 30 something. And then once in a while, you'll hear something about like the midlife dater or something else, but it's usually a novelty. Very few times is it the center. It's not centered. It's sort of like this thing off to the side. And I also knew that previously midlife dating had always been defined by divorce. And midlife dating now is not just about divorce. It's about all kinds of different paths. And so I really wanted to dive into like the diversity of it all. And what made it so, what were all the benefits of dating in this particular window, and how can we reimagine it? And I just did not think there was a lot of good content supporting this particular population at this particular moment in time, where there are apps, where there is texting, where there are voice notes. I didn't think that there was a modern take on it. And so I wanted to dive in and do that.
I love it. And I'm so glad that you kind of focus on Gen X too, because I feel like we are so ignored. Like you always hear about millennials, you hear about boomers, now you're hearing about Gen Z.
Yeah.
And no one gives a shit about Gen X, right? But we have such unique, I think we have the best of both worlds in some ways because
Yes.
we had the in real life kind of experience of being outside playing as kids, but then also, I remember getting my first computer like my senior year of like high school, right?
Yes.
First website in college. So we
No,
have to be
totally.
able to experience both. So what are the most important? I know we're talking about friendships, but I think there's a lot of parallels, like you mentioned, between dating and just making friends, right? So some folks on here are just really focused on making connections and friendships,
Yeah.
while some people on here might be really focused on dating. But I think there's parallels.
Yeah.
What are the most important things that a person dating in midlife, or Gen X, should consider?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to build on what you were saying about like people, them like midlifers kind of being good at both, it is so true. Like I have found that the people that I coach are so amenable to change. And I feel like that gets forgotten, that Gen Xers, because they kind of lived in both worlds, they really can bounce between those two worlds pretty well. And I think that's like easy to forget. I think one of the most important things is just to remember that if you haven't, especially if you haven't dated in a long time and you're starting to date in your 40s and 50s, you need a software update. Like literally need to have a software update. A lot of people are running on old software of what they thought was attractive, what they thought a relationship looked like, what it meant to date. And it comes from who they were in their 20s and 30s, even their teens sometimes. And so if you haven't updated it, you're going to go back to that old programming. And so you're going to be putting the modern day up against stuff that has been in the attic for a while. So that is, I think, one of the hardest things people to remember is that even though they're really good at relationships, they may have to really rethink what dating is. And this is the other thing that can sometimes be a challenge for midlife daters. They are successful. They have raised families. They have started blogs. They have run businesses. They have sold companies. They have become doctors, writers, lawyers, accountants. And that professional success does not always translate to knowing how to date. So you could have been the best boss. You can be super close to your kids. You can have best friends, but dating is a very, very particular kind of interaction and a particular kind of pursuit. And so I think understanding that you're getting into a lane that you may have not explored well, and sort of being open and humble and willing to understand that there's a big difference is one of the biggest, is number one. It's like the number one thing you have to sort of understand. And then the second I'll say, which is I've referred to this in relationships, but I cannot downplay how important this is. You, as a Gen Xer, if you're going to date in 2025, you have to understand how to inject your personality in different places, not just in person. You have to have a point of view on the phone, a point of view for text, a point of view for voice notes. You have to be willing to be your authentic self in some of the places that previously you may have used in transactional ways. So a lot of midlife daters, like they like texting, but it's been more of a transactional tool. Did you get the groceries? Did you pick the kids up? Did you, do that thing? And it's been more of a transactional thing. And now you have to use it as a way to build emotional connection and get to know somebody new. And that is a big adjustment. And I think honestly, probably one of the best skills that you can also develop, but it is an adjustment for a lot of people.
So what role does environment play in fostering friendship and relationships? Because, so I started my company about 4 or 5 years during the pandemic. And prior to that, I had to be out and about because I had to commute in the city. I had to go to the office. I actually had to wear clothes in the upper half, not just, and the bottom half. And so now it's like, so you would make friends just through work or meeting with the client. And now it's a little bit different. So my environment has changed. I've also moved to the suburbs and all this other stuff. How important is environment? And let's say you're in an environment so I live in a community where it's a lot of families. And I think about my friends who are single or divorced in my neighborhood. And it's so hard for them to date and make friends within the neighborhood because it's a family kind of community. If your community isn't conducive to meeting people for friendships or dating, how do you move beyond that? What are some tips?
You get online.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to be frank about that. I think everybody wants to meet in person, and that's a nice thing. And you will meet in person eventually, but our society is not set up for people in later demographics to necessarily meet in person. It happens sometimes, right? There's networking events, there's church, there's things like that. So that is probably your better bet. But if you don't have that, it's probably not going to happen in your community. And I think that's just sort of a reality that people have to accept. And I think everyone's talking about they want to meet organically. And I think that's a wonderful thing, but it's not the reality right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think people have to sort of lean into that. And I think but online, there are online communities, there are dating apps. I don't think those should be your only ports of entry, but I think it is unrealistic to think that will not be a part of the equation.
So it's so sad in some ways. You know what I mean? Because I think about my daughter. She goes to a playground and in 10 seconds, she's like, "Mom, I just met a new friend." You know what I mean? It's that because it's part of the community, it's a lot easier to connect. Let me give you one example of how it can possibly, and I'm not refuting what you're saying, Lakshmi, but so you know how my husband is an extrovert. He met this couple at the local coffee shop and started talking about me, looked at the wife and said, "Oh, you should meet my wife." And so he introduced us via email. Turns out this woman is an amazing connector. Her name is amazing. Amy, and she's a sweetheart. We met for coffee and she's like, "Oh, I bring because she had moved to a neighboring village recent, probably in the past year or two. And she was like, I wanted to make new friends. So I basically created these sushi Thursdays where she brings in 10, 15 women in the community. And I went to one of her sushi Thursdays probably 2 weeks ago. And it was such phenomenal women, different professions, different ages. And I think it is possible, but it takes effort. You know what I mean?
But you're talking about a platonic configuration.
Oh yes, a platonic dating. Okay, yes.
So that's different, right?
Yeah,
so
you wouldn't have 10 suitors.
Right. No, it's not.
Hopefully.
Specifically about dating and about, single people meeting. And that's why I was saying I understand the resistance to it, but it is going to be a part of it. But yes, just meeting humans.
Right,
yes,
Yeah,
is still possible, definitely out in
but
the
much
world.
harder dating. Yeah, yeah. You definitely wouldn't want 10 suitors in one room. Or some people might. Um, so I want to open it up for questions. Does anyone have any questions? You can either let me know in the comment or chat, or you can unmute. Anybody have any questions they want to ask? You could think about it as well, and then I will ask question and you can just kind of let me know. So while I wait for more questions to come in, um, how, wait, let me see. Lessons, let me check this in. So what are the key factors that make someone a good, either a good partner or a good friend or a good date at this stage of life? I don't know if it's different. I mean, maybe it's the same for all age demographics. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things, but I think like right now, because people are trying to figure out relationships, I think being able to tell your evolution and your story well, and kind of like why you do what you do, or like what happened in your day in an interesting and captivating way is really important. Our interactions with each other get more compressed, right? Not just on screen, but in time. And so sort of understand that when you meet someone, you want to be able to tell them in a very genuine, authentic way, like who you are, what you care about, maybe what happened in your day yesterday. You want to have like some anecdotes that really bring color and life so people can get a sense of your personality. I think, especially on dates, like the average date is between 60 and 75 minutes. That's not very long, right? And you're trying to get to know someone new for the first time, a relative stranger, right? And this applies to friendship too. And I'm not saying that you have to like hustle and like, word vomit on somebody, but having a sense of like, hey, here's like a couple of stories that are from like my recent week that are illustrative of who I am, and kind of having those ready to go is not a bad idea.
I love that. So I have a question that's anonymous. Someone just messaged me with this. So there's the question for you. There's also this post-COVID effect of people getting very comfortable being by themselves, and therefore the reluctance to meet new people,
Yeah.
overlaid with the fear of rejection. So I guess the question is like, how do you move past that? I guess the fear of rejection, post-COVID. And I know we kind of touched about it earlier briefly, but I don't know if you have
Yeah.
anything to add to
I
that.
mean, this relates very much to both like dating and friendship. It and to the person's question, it is so easy to be alone right now, right? It is easy to look up everything that you need, to ask the internet for answers. Um, and I think first acknowledging that, just how easy it is to be alone. Remember, like not so long ago, we had to work to get away from people,
Yeah,
right?
true.
Like you would book a room at the office just to be like, oh, right? Like I just need, and now it's the opposite. So I think just understanding that all of this is really new, and sort of letting yourself off the hook is really important. And then I think the other thing is really understanding that rejection is a part of dating. It is a part of making friendships. And just acknowledging that is going to take the sting away from it, right? Like not everybody is going to want to necessarily go with you to a movie. Not everybody is going to pick up your call. And it's nothing personal. It's just the way that it is. And then to take it just like one step further is to understand what forms of what are you calling rejection that might just be a misalignment,
Yeah,
right? Like I said, my friend, she is not going to call me, but she loves me.
yeah.
Right. And understanding, because some people take, if there's a delay in someone responding a text, they take that as rejection, right? If someone doesn't make plans proactively, they take that as rejection. So
Yeah.
really understanding, are you being rejected or are you being put on pause? You know,
Or is the person flaky? Because I'm so bad at returning text messages, and I get so many requests from people, and people know this who kind of follow me on LinkedIn,
huh,
is that I don't do one-on-one calls unless it's like a friend or a client or something like that, because it just, as an introvert, takes so much energy from me.
Right.
So, and
Yes.
you're like, well, that doesn't make sense because you're on a call with like, 40, 50 people right
Right.
now. But it's different. It's like a one-on-one call for me takes so much more energy than like having one of these calls. And it's like sometimes I have to explain to people because, to give you an example, my extrovert husband Kevin always he has random he'll meet people off the street and then take them in and just start chatting and eat coffee, whatnot.
I mean, I've
And
had dinner with your husband, so
yeah,
I
so
know.
you know how he is, right? He makes friends wherever he goes. Like, case in point right now, right? I met Lakshmi through my husband. But like I had to premise it because people would come in and half of his friends thought I hated them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I don't hate you. I really like you, but I just like being alone. I prefer being alone. And so I would have to tell people I'm a introvert. It has nothing to do with you. I just like my energy. Like, I don't like small talk. I don't like conversation. So I actually had to premise it with every friend he would come over. And so now they
Yeah.
know and they don't get offended when I'm like, oh, hey. And then I go into my room or read a book. You know what I
No,
mean?
that's a really good point. And another way to like think about it, like I always kind of repeat this to myself right now, especially right now in 2025. Everyone's communication and everyone's interaction is being recalibrated, like in real time. And so it's going to take a minute with anyone new that you're meeting. It's going to take a minute to understand their preferred communications, to understand what it is that they're working through, right? Like I wouldn't know unless you just told me. I wouldn't know that this is okay for you, but one-to-one is a little bit harder. There's
Yeah.
no way for me to know that because you can say introvert, but even introvert means 15
Different. Yeah.
different things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So someone can say I'm an introvert or an extrovert, but that doesn't necessarily give you all the insight that you need to understand how they communicate. And it's taken me some time, but even with like the people that I'm the closest to, I know, for instance, my brother does not like to be interrupted during work unless it's an emergency.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
my other friends, they're like, please interrupt me.
Yeah.
Right. And I understand that he prefers to talk when he's driving. That's his preferred.
Yeah.
That's when he can kind of relax and kind of get his day, and then like my dad does not text at all. He only does the phone. And I think that's a good way to really think about empathy and think about the moment that we're living in. Understand that just imagine every person you're interacting with and imagine there's like these tree branches and one is Slack, and one is the phone, and one is email, and one is screen, and one is in person, and one is in small crowds, one's in big crowds, one is, at a coffee shop, one is at a big party, and everybody is trying to figure out the strength of that branch to that tool or medium, right? And if you can just sort of understand that that's just going to get you to slow down.
Yeah.
And understand that everyone's branches of communication, and there's always these new forms of communication, right? We live in this very interesting time. And I think sometimes we want to be like, oh, well, that's the person. It is the person, but it is also this moment in time. This is unprecedented. And I think remembering that can kind of just give us a little bit more understanding. And imagination. I think imagination is huge right now.
I think what came into my head while you were talking was beyond friendship, but beyond even dating. What you just said really talks about emotional intelligence and even work, right? Because I was always kind of client facing, and I think the reason why I did well was I really tried to understand the client and do they like talking after hours? Are they more texting? Are they more a phone person?
Yes.
What are their buttons, right? Like I used to have when I was in account management in the agency side, I had clients where I would schedule calls while they were driving home from work to pick up their kids. And that was like our time, right?
Yeah.
And really having the emotional intelligence, whether in friendship, work, dating, it's all kind of the same. It's about really understanding the other person, that the other person is not going to be you. And that the gifted person who's really good at friendships, connections, emotional intelligence are the ones that are asking and thinking about the other person. It's empathy, right?
Yeah. And I love that you said that because it is interesting, right? Well, we'll do that in a client services scenario and we forget to do that for the other people in our lives,
Yeah. Our
right?
significant others too, like those of us who are in
Right. But
relationships.
that's a perfect example of how like we will develop a lot of emotional intelligence for in the world of capitalism and then forget to do that in our personal lives. That's a really, really good point. And applying that same kind of like level of understanding across the board, especially right now, like because we've never seen this much change to
Yeah.
our communication channels this quickly. And you have to give people a minute and
Yeah.
not necessarily make it mean everything about who they are.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So we have another kind of, I think, anonymous direct message. I attend a lot of networking events, gal pal events in my areas. We chat and feel like things are clicking during the event. I know that, right? However, I struggle with getting engagement responses after the event. I totally can relate to this, or being ghosted. What do we
Mm.
do in those scenarios? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people can relate to that question.
Yeah. Number one, like, first of all, keep trying. And also, I think that that's awesome. Like, I literally want to acknowledge the people that take that step because I think it's so important. So, like, seriously, celebrate the win in doing that. That is a big deal. I mean, what I would want to know is, not knowing all of the details is what exactly are you proposing? And are like have you maybe asked for something that person is not ready to offer, right? So you have to remember, like, are you just saying let's connect on LinkedIn? Are you saying let's grab coffee? Are you saying, I want to discuss my business plan for you? This has happened to me sometimes. I'll meet someone at an event and they will make a pretty big demand of me, like, can you look at my resume or something? And we didn't even talk about that. So I would just maybe also reflect on what is it that you've asked of that person? And is that congruent with the depth of the relationship?
Mm,
And just make sure that you're also being aware. Because sometimes people can make a big ask,
yeah.
a tiny interaction,
That's
and
such a
then
good
throw
point.
off the other person.
I think also when it's someone like you or, some of us are like public facing, right? And people feel like they know us. And so you will get DMs in terms of, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, not realizing that we get maybe thousands of requests to meet up or to connect this person with another person, and that it's not personal. And some people do take it very personal when it's just bandwidth. Like for me, I'm very transparent that my priority is my family, my friends. And it's like, I'm not going to be able to return every email or call. And some people will get offended with that. And I think you make such a great point where understand what type of relationship you have. Don't expect everyone to be like you, right? So
Yeah.
I can't believe I literally could talk to you for hours, but our time is up. I'm going to stay for 10 minutes and just do like a quick offline. I'm going to take this off of the live stream. And we're going to do a quick, for those who can, just like chit chat, right? But before we go, Lakshmi, how can we learn more about you? What can we do to help? Tell us about what you're working on, etc. How can we
Um,
support you?
I think if what I'm saying like resonates with you and interests you, and whether you're dating or not, because I talk a lot about just modern connection, not necessarily, it's not all related to dating, would be to listen to the podcast, The Later Dater Today. Like I have put my blood, sweat, and tears into that thing, and it's free. And I get a lot of comments and feedback about how that has shifted how people date, and then even how they interact in their personal and professional relationships. That's probably the best place to start with me. And if the podcast resonates with you, then yes, I do. I don't do as much anymore. I do very, very limited coaching. And all of the people that I coach come from our listeners of the podcast, which creates a really fun relationship.
And you're
But that's
speaking at an event in like a month or so? or
yes,
few
I
months?
am doing. Thank you, Lan. Thank you. I am speaking. I'm doing an online workshop at the Omega Institute next month. So just joined got invited to join their faculty, and I'm going to be doing a workshop on how to date humans later in life.
Opposed to AI and other
Yes,
things,
that's
right?
sort of like what it is a nod to. But we've talked about this. Relationships are changing by the minute, and how we connect to other humans is a very important topic right now.
I love that. Okay, so before I do the breakout groups, if you can, go into gallery mode right now. I know if you can, this is the one time where I ask you to unmute and turn on your videos if you are in the live Zoom audience, because Lakshmi deserves a big round of applause. So unmute, turn on your videos, and give
Yay.
Lakshmi a big round of applause. Woo-hoo!
Thank you so much,
Thank
Lan.
you, thank you,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Lakshmi. If you feel
Thumbs
comfortable,
up.
please stay, guys. I'm gonna do. I promise it will be unpainful. Let me stop recording first, and I am going to stop